Welcome to Puck Academy, a show about how hockey players grow on and off the ice. I'm Jason Jacobs, the host, and each week I talk with players, coaches, and experts shaping the future of player development. Today's guest is Jamie Rice, the Boxer Rice head men's ice hockey coach at Babson College. Jamie is a 1990 graduate of Babson, and he's been coaching there for 21 years, guiding the program to an overall record of 334, 175, and 48, or almost a 65% win percentage. During that time, he's also had 4 ECAC East tournament championships, the 2022 New England Hockey Conference tournament title, and Coach Rice was selected as the ECAC East and New England Hockey Writers Association Coach of the Year in 2014 after leading the Beavers to a 22-5-2 mark and their second consecutive league tournament title. Now, I was excited for this episode for a number of reasons. First, just an aside, I'm a Babson alum, and Coach Rice and I grew up in the same town, but that's just an aside. But more importantly, Coach Rice just seems to really care, to be really development focused. He's not hopped around. He's been at the same program for so long. He clearly loves it. He's in this game for all the right reasons. And it's also fascinating because some of his views are pretty different. For example, in practices, he barely does any drills. He doesn't like to say small area, but he does constraints-led games with smaller groups to foster environments that translate better to actual gameplay. He also really operates behind the scenes and lets the players drive the ship. And don't get me wrong, Coach Rice is there to tune and steer and guardrails and make sure that everything operates how it should. But it really seems like he empowers his players to take ownership and build a self-reinforcing cycle to perpetuate the brand and the cohesiveness year after year after year. The program also seems to have an incredibly strong alumni network, not just of people a year or two earlier or a year or two after you, but across all levels of the program. It seems like Coach Rice has done a really nice job of keeping that group together. And it's fascinating to dig into his philosophies, how they came to be, how they've evolved since he first started coaching many years ago, and also just the changes that he's seeing, how those changes are affecting what's happening at the Division I level, and of course, what seeps down to the Division III level, and not just what's happening to his left and his right, but which of those things Coach Rice is adapting to and which ones he's kind of willfully ignoring. At any rate, really fantastic discussion, and I hope you enjoy it. Coach Rice, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I've been trying to track you down for a little while. I think for a bunch of reasons. One, I've listened to some other shows you've been on, and we're both from Newton. I think in emails, it turns out I think your sister worked at the sporting goods store. That was my first job ever when I was 14 years old. I grew up going to Dexter hockey camp in the summers, and there were a bunch of Babson players there. And I'm wondering if I'm sure there were people that you knew because I'm like 6 or 7 years younger than you, and so it's I'd just be surprised if you or people you knew weren't there. I mean, my son's been skating with you at some of the Coach Canada stuff. So, and I'm just such a fan of your philosophies, what I've heard you talk about. Obviously, your track record speaks for itself. So I'm so grateful for you making the time to come on my little show.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and certainly Newton, hockey, and Dexter all tend to be fairly small worlds. So at some point, there certainly is an intersection for all of us.
It's crazy. And even now, I mean, I grew up playing, and then after I hung up the skates partway through college, it kind of just became dormant, even though it was a huge part of my life growing up, and business and startups kind of took over for the role that hockey and athletics filled growing up with, team and camaraderie and competition and all of that. And then it was with my kids that it's kind of been reawakened. But when I look at the jerseys in the rinks, I recognize so many of the last names because they're like kids of people that I grew up playing with and against.
I've been really fortunate to basically continuously be in a locker room since I was about 6 years old. I'm really blessed that way, but it is incredible the amount of intersection that you have from your youth, from your past, from people you've known, even if maybe you didn't play with somebody, a brother, a sister, a relative. And I think it's one of the greatest things about sports is it's a great connector between people. And certainly most of us wind up in a life outside of professional sports and even potentially outside of sports. But that connection with athletics, with teams, with having played against, with, or even watched someone else, it's always kind of a nice jumping off point in every relationship. Say, hey, we have a little commonality. Back in, 1978, you were on this Watertown squirt team and I was on the Newton squirt team. And oh yeah, I kind of remember you. You were number 7, weren't you? And so it's a great way to connect with people.
Typically in these episodes, we start with history and journey into the sport and all that. And I feel like I know that stuff about you because I've listened to a bunch of other shows, and I'd like to cover new ground. And there's a bunch of things I'm dying to cover. I feel like we should do some of that because listeners haven't had the same prep, but I definitely don't want that to be the whole episode. So do you want to just give kind of a quick overview of how you came up in the sport?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I grew up in Newton. I was the youngest of 5 children. I was the only hockey player in my family. My father and one of my sisters and my brother were basketball people, and I just kind of took to the game. I had a babysitter on Tuesdays and Thursdays, John Butterworth, who was a great player in Newton. His mom was a skating school instructor, Boston Skating Club instructor. And I used to go to their house on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and pretty simply, she told my mom and dad, like, he can either watch or he can skate. And so I started and off I went and grew up, Newton was a great sports town growing up. Baseball was a huge part of my life. The Little Leagues in Newton, there were 5 of them. We had an intercity baseball league from 13 to 15, which had 12 or 14 teams. We had a national league in baseball, which was 16 to 19, which was 8 to 10 teams. There was the American Legion. There was certainly youth hockey, Pop Warner. There was a lot of things going on. So it was just great. So I gravitated to kind of playing anything and everything I could. I was truly a backyard kid. I remember, I don't know if this is, I think the statute of limitations is gone, but Woodland Country Club, I grew up kind of at the bottom of a hill from Woodland.
Wait a minute. I grew up right around the corner from there, right up Beacon, like a couple side streets up Beacon, off of Route 16 is where I grew up.
Yeah. So I was right down from Woodland, and I took the T markers. I took 4 blue ones and 4 white ones off of a hole there to make the end zone pylons. So our backyard was a football field. It was a Little League field. My godparents lived behind us, and much to their chagrin, I tacked on netting onto the fence to make my own green monster. My dad had friends who built nets for us. So kind of, we had a basketball hoop. I built goalposts to kick through. Even tried to make one of those professional kind of ball holders. Anything that was in the basement or in the garage, I somehow put into a sport. And so it was just something I enjoyed. I loved being around. I loved competing. I loved playing. And some of the games were with neighbors, some with go play someplace else. I remember off of Auburndale Ave, a friend of mine, Tommy Malloy, they had a median in the McAuliffes, and we used to play tackle football out there. And so it really didn't matter to me. I just loved playing and loved being outside and loved playing sports, probably like most kids, and skating at the Cove was a big part of my childhood. So it really didn't matter. I don't think I ever gravitated towards one really, but was happy to play them all and found my way into being a college athlete in baseball and hockey. And then I was going to have an opportunity to teach or coach at Salisbury School or coach hockey at Colby. And I don't know why I chose just the singular hockey route, but I did. And here I am, 36 years later from graduation, and, about 52 years later from being a 6-year-old running around at 20 Vista Ave in the backyard, taking the T markers from Woodland to make my 8 end zone pylons.
Yeah, but I've heard you say that no matter when you see your players in life, they're still at the age they were in the locker room to you. I think we all feel that way, also about ourselves.
Yeah, no, I'm the ultimate kid. I mean, I wear shorts to work, 6+ months a year. I'm in the sandbox of life for sure. But I think it's one of the greatest things about sports, as I mentioned earlier, the connectivity, but also the relationships you have. You have shared memories, you have shared experiences, but you really do get to kind of teletransport at a given point in time. You know, if I saw a teammate from Rivers where I went to high school, or Hotchkiss where I PG'd, or Babson, or youth hockey, or a young man that I've coached at one of my college stops along the way, it's always like that moment in time when you interact with them. You're not really talking about politics or what's going on in the global economy. You're kind of talking about, hey, remember, you talk about Dexter Hockey Camp. I can remember riding the bus to Dexter Hockey Camp with kids from Westwood, because that was our bus route. And when I see them now, I do skills for Westwood on Thursday nights and have for 18 years. I've seen some of those fathers say, hey, like, I remember you. I think you gave me a wedgie when I was, 9 years old on the back of the bus. So I think that's one of the greatest things that I've been fortunate to be a part of in being athletics, is the shared memories, but going back to that moment in time. And a lot of times, maybe because I haven't grown up, but people are always like, geez, I can't remember you remember that. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. It left an imprint on me somewhere along the way.
Yeah, but then you don't remember like what you had for breakfast today. So
Yeah,
it's weird. It's weird how it works.
I've told the story. We actually, two of them now. We just got a washing machine. My family didn't have a washing machine for 2.5 years. I was kind of oblivious to that. And I do the laundry. So I would just go down to the laundromat. And there was a time where one year the light bulb was out in the refrigerator for 4 months. It just happened to coincide with November, December, January, and February, which tend to be a little bit of a tunnel for me. And at the end of the year, I was like, geez, the light bulb's out. And my kids were like, yeah, it's been out since November. Like, oh, all right, dad'll handle that.
One thing that struck me when I was preparing for this discussion is just how much joy you get from what you do, and how, even more than the wins and the losses, making sure that your players have memories and create friendships and have character and strong values and things like that. And you don't strike me as one to chase, yet you've achieved. I mean, your track record's insane. So a question that comes to mind when I reconcile those two things is, where do goals fit into all of this? How important are they? Are you a believer in goals? Do you set goals for yourself? Or are you more kind of living in the moment and letting life unfold as it does?
I certainly have goals, but I think culture, goals, process are all really overused words right now, and for good reason. They have great value. I guess I've just tried to be myself, and my passion was always being on a team. My passion was always competing, and I think subliminally, I learned a lot of the lessons that I try to share without someone kind of beating them down on me. It sparked my interest in reading. It sparked my interest in reading the types of books I read. It sparked my ability to think about, hey, these are things that I've carried with me for now, 50 years, say from the time I was 8 till 58 now, that I'm not sure anyone ever said, this is your goal, this is your culture, this is your, how you should act, this is your character. It was just being around a lot of really great people. And I think taking a little bit of something from all of them and trying to emulate them in some ways and understanding what they were trying to do. I would say I hope and believe I was always very coachable. I was always interested in being coached and how a team got put together. But for me personally, like, our goal is very simply, we want to have the best year we can every year here at Babson. I don't know what that will look like. I don't know what it looks like in reverse. I don't know what it looks like in a head. I just know what it looks like today. And so today we'll try to put forth our best effort when we practice at 115. And my job, my responsibility to the players and to this program is for me to be as prepared as I can for our practice, to help them get the most out of it, to help them achieve whatever they want to do. But a specific goal for myself, like, I really don't have any goal. I want to live a long, healthy life and grow up to see grandkids and things like that. But, I just want our program to be the best it can be every day. And I do want our players to have a lifelong connection to one another and to the program, I hope. And it'll be different for every single player. There are some players who, will go off and maybe they never reach back out to me. And that's okay. It's not that I hope it's not that they don't like me, or I hope it's that they haven't enjoyed it, but life takes us all in different directions and we get busy with a lot of different things. But I'm most satisfied by the number of people who do reach out. And it could be somebody reached out once in the last 10 years, but just that connection at one point. I mean, I think and I've talked about in other podcasts or interviews, things of that nature. It's a real thrill when you get invited to a player's wedding, because obviously you've had some dramatic impact on them. We feel like, hey, on my most special day at this moment of my life, we'd like you to share in it. But the ones who don't, I'm not regretful or, oh, did I do something wrong? I understand that there's a limited number of guests and there's other things in their lives. And maybe this was just a small piece of their entire journey. But my one overarching thing is I hope every player leaves with one thing over their 4 years that they've taken away from the program that's going to help them somewhere in the next 40 years. We give the guys a lot of articles and thoughts and quotes, and I have all sorts of stories that I try to share, and sometimes they're bizarre and they look at me like, where is he going with this? But if everyone takes one thing after their 4 years here, and somehow it helps them in their next 40, then I feel like we've done something successful. But goals, aspirations, I want us to have a great day today. I want our program to be a lifelong connected memory and passion for them. And while we're here, certainly on Fridays and Saturdays, I want us to win.
You mentioned that journey informs the books that you like to read. I'm just curious what kind of books you like to read.
I read a lot of leadership books. I read a lot of psychology books. I'm actually reading a book now about the development of boys, because it's certainly something that's in our wheelhouse and how what they're faced with now. We have a 23-year-old son. So I've seen a little bit, but even with him, I don't know everything. I haven't grown up in an era where what people post on social media about themselves or about me, really has deep matters. So I try to learn stuff like that. The one thing I do try to do now is mix in some fiction, because I found for a while, probably 25 years ago, I was reading so many leadership coaching self-help books that you kind of screw yourself up. It's hard to find your true north because you can read one book that says, leadership is X, another book says leadership is Y, another book says leadership is Z, and the fourth book says leadership isn't anything, it's followership. So, how do you reconcile all that? So I did find that I was just getting pulled in a lot of directions. So now I try to mix in a good fiction book for every 2 books I read a fiction book in there, and then go back to screwing myself up.
You've talked before about your leadership style and how you didn't use these words, but what I took from it, and correct me if I get anything wrong, is that you try to fade into the background and let the players drive the bus, right? And what I'm curious about is there's a chicken and egg, right? Because if you're just coming in and you let the players drive the bus, but you're just getting going, they'll drive it right off a cliff, right? But you've built up so much trust that is then self-reinforcing over the years, and it perpetuates because the system, because there's always some players who've been there for, who are ingrained in it there to help the new crew coming in, right? And then rinse, repeat. But how does that get going to begin with? Because you can't do it that way to begin with.
It's certainly something that has grown and evolved and probably changes a little bit every year. But at the outset for me is, there's very little a coach can control once the game starts. Aside from who goes on the ice, and before that, who's going to participate in the game, once the game goes, because it's a continuous, invasive, transitory game, they can't stop and say, hold on, coach, we didn't cover this on Tuesday, or you said that they would be doing X and they're not. So I believe in my heart that, Monday to Wednesday for me as a coach and for our coaches is when we try to instill what I would call the 20,000 foot view, the foundational pieces of, hey, these are things we want to be good at. These are things we need to do to be successful. But within that, there's 1,000 different ways, and I think the trust in our players, one, I'm really fortunate to be at a school that attracts great kids from great families who are really smart. So they can handle a lot, they can be given a lot. But I think in general, they have so much ability and they've been overcoached by the time they get to us. I think like it's video replay. Like if we have to slow something down and watch it for 4 minutes with 11 different views at 1/1000 speed, that's not reality. And it's very easy in hindsight to pick apart, hey, you didn't do this, or we didn't do this, or you should have done that. And the fact is, when the game's going on, it's not that easy. It's like Star Wars out there. It's coming at them at light speed. And more so now than ever, our game is really fast. But I think any athletic event. So I always relate it to like someone who can hit the ball really well on a lesson at the driving range, and they get out on a golf course. And then it's completely different. The ball is not flat on a piece of AstroTurf in ideal conditions with a 50-yard wide netted, range. It's a dogleg left. It's shorter. It's longer. It's windy. It's rainy. At the end of the day, can you get the club head square on the ball is all that matters. So I guess what we're trying to do Monday to Wednesday is when we get to Thursday, which that practice the players have complete ownership of, other than the playlist, and Friday and Saturday, the games, is can they get the club head square on the ball? And if they can't, can we make some adjustments? And we're not absconding coaching, but it really does belong to the players. And you mentioned it, and one of the things that I really believe, and we just actually mentioned this to the team on Friday night, hockey players don't need coaches. Teams do. Teams need coaches because someone has to kind of direct, shape, get it going in the right direction. Because if it was left to the players, I don't know if it would go off the cliff, but they'd all put themselves on the power play and they'd all take extra long shifts and they'd all make the lineup based to their best knowledge. But the players, to play hockey, to play the game in and of itself, to go to a pond today, to go to the Cove or Bigelow if they're open, you don't need a coach to go down and play. It's just when a team gets together, there needs to be some direction. But the players ultimately are really the drivers of the team. And our job is a little bit like a sheep herder. It's occasionally to, push it back in line a little bit to the right or push it back in line a little bit to the left, or make sure that collectively everyone's going in the same direction. That's the real role and job of a coach, and to provide an environment that they feel comfortable in, going out and playing, let it rip.
When you think about a crew that you can work with, it's not just about them trusting the system, it's about you trusting them. What are the things when you think about constructing the team or recruiting that they need to have coming in and that are uncompromisable? And what are the things that it's like, oh, I can work with that, like they just don't know the system yet and I can mold them once they're here?
I think at the forefront, and it's two parallel train tracks, but kind of similar. We want great kids who have good ability. Like I think people hear me say that and like, oh, he just wants great kids. And, this kid's a great kid, but he's not a good player. Well, they've got to be, at the minimum standard for athletic ability. But we want great kids who are good athletes. And then I want kids who really want to be at Babson. Like it's hard to go to a school like Babson and do well academically, to have a social life, to be able to afford it, to make the sacrifice you have to have. And we don't want to have players who wish they were someplace else. Now, I wanted to go to BU. Like when I was 18, I thought, the 80 Olympics had happened. I grew up watching BU hockey. So I'm like, okay, 88 or 92 Olympics, then pro hockey. And, I didn't know. BU didn't want me and I wound up at Babson. So I realized that not everybody's going to fall out of the crib saying I want to go to Babson. But at the point where the reality is that they are a Division III hockey player, that they are a good enough student to get into a select college, that they want to play at the highest level, that's when I want their decision to be like, you know what, I want to be at Babson. I want everything that Babson has to offer. So being a great kid who has the necessary ability and then loves Babson and wants to be here, I think when you get those people in the same room, it's very easy to coach or to be a part of that group. And I don't think of myself as the leader of it. I'm a part of it. I'm one of 33 people in our program this year. Our strength coach, our trainer, our 27 young men who make up the roster, our coaches, like we're all one part of it. We're all 1/133rd of it. So being a part of it is more important than saying, I'm the leader of it, I'm the coach. Yes, someone has to make some decisions. My assistant makes decisions on where we eat, like he's in charge of the food. And we collaboratively talk about who's going to play in a game and how much and where we're going to use them. But, we're just a part of it. And we just try to uphold our end of the bargain and do the best we can with our part every day. And I think that's probably the hardest part for players to see, is that the coaches, or at least in our case, our coaches, we don't want to be, we just won the championship of a tournament, in-season tournament in Oswego, and our coaches aren't in the picture by design. Like we have championship photos. I'm looking at them right now on our wall, and the coaches are in the back row. The players drive it. We want to be a part of it, but I want them to know and believe and understand, I hope they do, that we are investing. I'm going 4 months without a light bulb in the refrigerator because I'm thinking about Babson hockey. So when they get here every day, if they can understand my energy and my passion and our assistant's energy and passion, the strength coach and the trainer, if they can feed off of that a little bit, because they have much more going on. They do have class. My relationships are set. My 3 children and my wife, that we've been a family for a long time. But they have girlfriends, and they have friendships, and they have class, and they have room selection, and they have housing selection, and they have everything else going on. And they have jobs and internships. So I hope that when they get here within that hour and a half or 2 hours, this can be the most important part. But for us as coaches, that's where we have to make the sacrifice and choose to, and say, okay, aside from when we're sleeping, and probably somewhere in my REM brain, it's still clicking, but we're going to do everything we can to put the program first. And so if we get young men at the outset who are going to put the program first and want to be here, I think we have a good recipe.
One of the things I wrestle with as a parent, and I'm sure a bunch of listeners wrestle with it as well, both parents and players who, aspire to have their kid or if they're the kid to play at a school like Babson, is, you want the best for your kid. And as the path gets harder, and it's not just sports, like it feels like with globalization and for a bunch of, automation and for a bunch of reasons, like it just feels like there's, I don't know, I go back and forth with it. Are we, is this the best it's ever been, or are there headwinds? Are the headwinds blowing harder, right? But at any rate, in hockey, at least for the U.S. kids, it seems like they're blowing harder, right? So it's like, I want my kid should do this, my kid should do that, my kid should do this. Like if he or she wants to have any chance, and then same thing with school, like they need to do their homework, they need to, follow this track, right? But actually, one of the most important things it feels as a parent is not what they do, but it's like who they are, right? Or in the hockey world, it's not necessarily like, to your point about the driving range, it's not how their shot is or, how much they can bench press, but it's like, what's their compete level? Like what's the speed of their decision making? Like how sound is their decision making? It's a lot more of these kind of intangible, their character. How are they as a teammate, right? And so how do you balance that and this is more a parent question, but how do you balance what you do with what you are?
If I had that answer, I wouldn't be coaching hockey at Babson. First and foremost, I think that we all, as adults, kind of say, back in our day, or this is how we did it, or this is how I grew up, or this is what, I think we need to recognize what's going on in the world today. So a point in case would be, if 20 years ago you had told me the best player in the United States offensively, and let's for argument's sake say it's Austin Matthews, was going to be a player of Mexican descent from Phoenix, Arizona, it would have been laughable. So you talk about the pressures parents face. So when I played at Babson, my first 2 years here, we had 2 players from outside of Massachusetts. One was Warwick, Rhode Island, and one was Enfield, Connecticut. Both essentially within real close proximity of Massachusetts. We've had captains from Florida, from Ohio, from North Carolina, from Washington, D.C. in my years here. So one of the things parents are faced with today is the game has grown, which is a great thing. It's fantastic. But with that means that there's more kids playing. So when I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, trying to make my way through youth hockey to prep school hockey to college hockey, If you were from Massachusetts, Minnesota, Michigan, New England, New York, you had a shot because that's really all that was playing hockey. There were some outliers, but not many. Now it's a global game. And certainly in our country for these kids, when you look at going to a prep school, and let's say it's a boarding school, when I was a postgraduate at Hotchkiss, again, all of our kids were New England, New York. I think we had a couple in New Jersey. Now there's kids from Florida, from Georgia, from Illinois, which is not, unpopulated, obviously. California, could be Arizona. So you're getting the effects of something completely out of your control. So if you are thinking about, well, hey, 15 years ago, Matt Boldy played for the South Shore Kings when he was 8, and that's how he got to the NHL. Well, 15 years ago is even different than today. And Matt Boldy is an exceptional player with exceptional talent. But just because he wore that jersey doesn't mean that that's the path for every single kid. Because there's also players on the Minnesota Wild who didn't play for the South Shore Kings. There's players at BC, at BU who didn't have the same path. And I look at our team, even kids, we have 2 seniors who both were at Deerfield together the year of COVID. One's from North Carolina, one's from Milton, Mass. Completely different backgrounds. But yet they're both here. One after Deerfield went to play in Alberta, one played locally junior hockey. Different paths. They're both at Babson, and they both shared an experience at Deerfield, but to Deerfield and after Deerfield before getting to Babson, completely different. So we cannot look back and say, it used to be this way because it's completely different. We cannot look at other people and say, oh, so-and-so played at X team for Y coach and he got to Z. If you look at someone like Matt Boldy or Jack Eichel, I always use Jack Eichel as an example. If you walk in almost any rink in Eastern Massachusetts, they've got Jack Eichel shot here, he skated here, he trained with this guy, he lifted with that guy, he played on this team. Jack Eichel deserves a lot of the credit for Jack Eichel being great. And those people certainly helped him. But Jack Eichel had genetics, drive, ability, desire, passion, athleticism, whatever. He had a lot of those things, and those people all helped bring it out and certainly deserve some credit. But Jack Eichel deserves the most credit. So a long way of getting to the point of, I don't know how you get from A to B. And it's completely different for every family. And the thing that I would say to any parent having done, so our 3 children went to 3 different schools because they were different fits for each of them. They all played youth hockey. None of them play hockey in college. 2 of them are college athletes. One graduated, one's current. Neither of them in a sport that when they were 8 or 9, they played at all. Neither of them for a sport at 13 that they maybe just got introduced to. One in field hockey and one in football. Our other daughter played hockey all the way up and then wound up being a swimmer and a rower in high school. We taught them how to swim. All of our kids in our family, we think you should be able to read, skate, and swim. That's kind of, if you're a Rice, those are the 3 things you got to have. But competitive swimming wasn't something that was on our radar. Rowing certainly wasn't on our radar, and she chose not to pursue athletics in college. But they all played something completely different than 8, 9, or 10. If I had said, oh, they're going to do X, Y, Z, that it's going to happen. So easy to say, enjoy the ride. Let your kids learn, make sure they learn how to read. Make sure they're good students. Make sure they're good people. And then whatever happens, it's going to happen. You cannot force it. There's around the corner from our house, it used to be an Arby's. It's now a Russian School of Math. There are cars there at 9:30 at night. So when people tell me hockey people are crazy, I say, yeah, I think the math people are right there with us. It doesn't matter. Everybody wants so much more. And when you and I were growing up, and again, as you mentioned, I'm a little older than you, so thanks for mentioning that. There was no private lesson to go to. There was no thought that you could go to the Babson Skating Center at 6 a.m., 4 days a week, and work with Coach X on your stride, on your stick handling, on your shooting, on your backwards crossovers, whatever. It's like at 6 a.m. you were, eating a bowl of Fruit Loops and watching, go Gophers. Now these options are there. So for us to be like, oh, you don't have to do it. I don't know if you do or don't. I just know that none of that guarantees you're going to get at the end of the road what you think you are when you set out. And so if you're not enjoying the journey, if you're not enjoying your child's exploration of growth and development and just being on a team and what that means, and even that's harder now. But if you're not enjoying that, and more importantly, if your child's not enjoying it, it really doesn't matter where they wind up, because you're going to have wished away 6, 8, 10 years of their lives chasing something that may or may not come to fruition. And so if you are foregoing family vacations to play in the Summer Splash Showdown in Guam, or you're playing in the soccer super series in Alaska, and you're not going on family vacation, my honest opinion is you are missing out on opportunities for you and your children to have a lifelong connection that go far beyond the t-shirt you're going to get. And no one who has or has not played in one of those tournaments, that did not determine their future success.
I've heard you say before that you think, and correct me if I'm quoting wrong, but that failure is an important part of the development process. As a parent, and again, I'll come back to the parent questions because as much as this is an athletic show, it's an athletic development show, and so if athletics is a big part of your kids' stuff, right? There's a lot to sort through. What are the things that you should let them fail and learn the hard way on, and what are the things that you should kind of step in and keep things on the rails? Because that's another thing I really wrestle with as a dad.
Yeah, is your child hurt or in danger versus unhappy? And it's really simple to say that way, but I think we, as adults, culturally, emotionally, and I think obviously we're in a generation that had to deal with COVID, where parents really did have to help necessitate some ability for their children and families to navigate that challenging time. But if your child's not in danger, if it's hurt feelings versus being physically hurt, if it's, disappointed versus, being abused or beaten down, I think, there's a great book, The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. You're going to build some resilience and grit and character and toughness. And I think you're also going to allow them to decide what's really important to them. If you are stepping in constantly, and when failure happens, providing the pathway to what may become less failure or what you hope is more success, then that's not their journey. And at the end of the day, they are going to determine what they become much more, growing up, having raised twins and being in coaching. So our twins were born in 2006. So at that point I had coached for 16 years. And trust me, after all the books I read and the people I've been around, nurture, 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 nurture. You can create, you can develop, you can environment. And then these two come along, same parents. They literally are, biologically almost the same person, and they couldn't be more different. And that was a real aha moment for me. And seeing as they've developed into young ladies who are, we're very proud of as parents, and just that we think are incredible young ladies. Nature wins out. So if you are intervening in nature as a parent, if you are intervening with their ability to develop grit, resiliency, toughness, if you are intervening and not letting them fail, and again, no one likes to see their kids not do well. No one likes to see their kids fail. Most of all, none of us like to see our kids upset. But is it a problem that they can work through? Is it something where they can come out on the other side of it with some things that are going to stick to them the rest of their lives, versus something that, again, is causing them harm? Harm and disappointment are two incredibly different things. I did not make the, Newton Youth Hockey used to have AA and A. AA was the top team, A was second team. My first year Bantam, I didn't make, 13 years old, didn't make the AA team. I was on the A team. Okay, how it went. I didn't move out of town. Now, there was no options. There was no junior whatever. I couldn't have, go. But I played on that team. My freshman year at Babson, we used to have a JV team. The first night of the season, we had 2 scrimmages. There was a JV game and a varsity game. And I played in both. And I was the only one in my class who played in both. And I'm looking around thinking, geez, you recruited me. You thought I was a pretty good player. Why am I the only one in this JV game? I don't know. I didn't ask. I just, okay, come at 5, play at 5 and 8. Okay, that's what I'll do. I didn't ask why. I didn't say, am I not good enough? My parents didn't call and say, he's not being treated fairly. Those are 2 real things that I've carried with me for a long, long time that I probably have never shared right today. So this is the first time, this is it. But I had to learn about myself, and I had to develop and fight through, and both experiences wound up working out fine for me. So don't step in if your kid is disappointed. Certainly soothe them. Try to explain that it's not the end of the world and that things can continue to move forward. But if they're not being harmed, I think being disappointed and having to find their way through that challenge is really, really helpful, because there are very few things that we can truly interject into and change the pathway of for them.
I know that in your practices, you do barely any drills, and it's all compete, compete, compete. I've also heard you talk about how if you were I think you said the Massachusetts hockey czar, you would make it, everyone play for their town until you're 13, right? When we grew up, we've talked about how different it was, where you'd go out and play at the ODR for hours, and a lot more unstructured time, a lot more playing in the neighborhood. And, it seems like the train's kind of left the station on this new world, right? And so we can, I think you've called it in prior episodes. I don't know why I remember all this stuff, but like old man yelling at the clouds, like you don't want to be the old man yelling at the clouds, right? But at the same time, right, there's some things about the system, right, that maybe aren't ideal. So I think a tricky thing as a parent is not liking certain aspects of the system, but still needing to play the cards you're dealt, right? And so given that unstructured time where all the kids are around, is super hard to come by because everyone's on different club schedules. For example, what options do you have if your kid wants to play more, right? You can drag them around to all these individual skills that I suspect you think don't translate well to game environment anyway. So not only are they inaccessible and expensive, but like they don't even work, right? So I guess what advice do you have to navigate? Like, do you just opt out if you don't like the system, or do you hold your nose and play within the system even if you don't like it? Like, how do you navigate if your kid truly loves the game and wants to play at as high a level as he or she can?
Probably yes. That would be the answer to all those questions. I really don't like to tell people what they should do, because every family's circumstance is different. Every child's circumstance is different. Everybody's financial, there's so many variables. I know what we did with our children, which I think worked for them, but there's other kids who went a different path and it worked. My daughter who plays field hockey here, she never played club field hockey, never played field hockey outside of 4 years at Lawrence Academy, and she did some youth clinics with, ironically, our women's field hockey coach here at Babson when she was 8, 9, or 10. But that was kind of like, we got to divide and conquer and get these 3 kids out of the house and do something. And okay, she'd like to try this. You can do everything. You don't have to do everything. I think that most people that you will encounter in any youth sport are well-intentioned. I don't think anybody's out there not trying to do a good job. So however I view the game, or how it should be taught, or how it should be coached, or what you should do, doesn't mean I'm right. It's my perspective on things. If we went to a restaurant, someone would get chicken, someone would get pasta, someone would get seafood, someone would get steak, someone would get a salad. They're all great dishes. It's personal preference. I think as long as your child wants to do it, has no anxiety about it, has no fear of missing out about it, has no afterwards regret about it, it's probably an evaluation. I wouldn't say every day or every event, but I think an honest check-in, and it doesn't even have to be, you're not going to really check in with an 8-year-old and say, hey, what do you feel about this emotionally? How did you, but your own children. That's where I go back to parenting. Apply the same lessons in parenting that you do in everything else to use sports. And it's hard because you've got competition, you've got more so than ever. Like, I don't think people are ever coming to your house say, hey, kids should eat more potato chips. My kids eat potato chips, and look at them. They're 6'4". Your kids need to eat more Lay's. They don't do that. But when it comes to sports, like, hey, our kid played in the John Smith soccer school, and look at him now. Your kid's got to do that. It's much easier. Or people look at it and say, hey, how'd your kid get to be so good? Oh, he went to John Smith soccer school. No one ever asked me how our son became 6'4". It just happened. I tell people we hung him upside down at night and stretched him out. It just happened. He became 6'4". But no one's ever asked me that. But someone may say, hey, how did your son become a college football player? Oh, well, he went to St. Sebastian's and he had Bob Sousa as a coach and Ed McCarthy. So I don't know that there's any way, but I don't think any of us as parents in general make bad decisions about helping our children grow, mature, nurture them. I love ice cream. I can't eat it every meal. I would be 700 pounds and I'd, probably have a heart attack. But I love ice cream. So I'm able to regulate that. If your child wanted to eat Eggo waffles, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you probably step in and say, yeah, you're going to mix in, some vegetables, or you're going to have some protein, whatever it is. Do the same thing with sports. Because there's something on the menu every meal, from 6 a.m. to probably 10 p.m. And they still have to go to school. They still have to be a sibling or be if they're an only child, a child to parents. They have to have friends. They have to do other things. They have to play music. They have to read. They have to have some alone time. They have to watch Stranger Things. Whatever it is they're going to do, just take the same thing you do as a parent. Because I don't think there's any parent out there that will let their kid eat ice cream and not go to school all day. Like, I don't want to go to school and I just want to eat ice cream. Sure. It would take one question, be like, get out the door. You're going to school. So try to apply your own parenting skills that you do in everything else to athletics, knowing that it's much harder. There are greater forces working against you to follow your instincts as a sports parent than there are as a regular parent.
Jumping over to the way you run practices, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I've heard you say that maybe 1 or 2 drills a week, and it's mostly these. I know you hate the term small area games, so call it like constraints led, or I don't know what words you use.
Those are good. Those are good.
So are you? I mean, I'd love to understand that better. Are you more of a planner of that, or are you like a DJ that just kind of reads the room and changes constraints on the fly? Like how scripted is that? And also the stuff you're trying to teach there, like, is that teaching in your mind, or is it really just like creating an environment and stepping back and that's as close to teaching as you're going to get?
Again, yes to all. First and foremost, there's a tremendous amount of planning that does go. I mean, we're not just literally throwing the pucks out there and saying, hey, do whatever you want. So all of the things that we do in practice, all of our games, they have constraints, variables, rules. We are trying to isolate a particular part of the game, knowing that so if we're working on transition, that could be the emphasis, but obviously people are going to be scoring, goals are going to be making saves, we're going to have to defend. So we're playing the game of hockey within these games that have different variables, ice sizes, numbers, etc., so that, when the players get to a game, the big game, they've been in those environments. I think there's a tremendous amount of self-learning by the players. And I think that's most important. Again, as a coach, as a teacher, I think it provides invaluable opportunities to teach and provide feedback, because you are not saying you should have turned left around that cone, you went right. You're saying, hey, this pass was available and you didn't make it, or you didn't see it, or maybe this was a better option. So, you're providing feedback with what actually occurs in a game. And that's what I think sometimes people are like, oh, he doesn't coach at all. I would say we coach a lot. It's just not the demonstrative at a whiteboard, you do this. It's not at the front of the bus, like, hey, this is how we're going to do things. I think most sports are overcoached right now. I think if you flip on a basketball game, and I'm not diminishing basketball at all, the player gets a rebound and they immediately look to the bench and the coach is gesticulating and do this and this and this. How about the kid gets the ball and looks and assesses at what's going on? And I'm not, it sounds like I'm, dumping on basketball coach. I'm not. I just think most sports are really overcoached. So maybe that's why I've gravitated a little more to undercoaching, to letting the players develop, learn, make mistakes, fail, succeed. But within that, before we get on the ice and do those things, there is a lot of planning about how everything fits together and how one game leads to another game, leads to another game, what sequence the games are played in, what variables we might add to them, because we're usually every day drilling down on one or two really key points. And within those one or two key points, that's where the 3 or 4 games we play, they're the vitamins in the applesauce. They're kind of underneath there, although the players understand yesterday was transition. But we're not talking about, well, is that strictly regrouping with the defenseman? Is that strictly stealing a puck in the offensive zone? Is that strictly a breakout? It could be any and all of those things. Transition's a larger concept, so let's be able to handle it in a lot of different ways. I find it more enjoyable. I hope our players do. I think it means that no two practices are ever the same. Even our Thursday practice, which has been the same practice for 22 years, 18, 20 times a year, each one of those Thursdays has been different, even though they've done the same 6 things. So that's what I like about, the players learning the game through playing games, and you as a coach decide, what's important to you, how you want to do it, how you want to develop it. And then from there, let them have a little bit, and you can interject and create a constraint or variable or change the numbers to create another, outcome potentially. But even, I think of some of the games that we play here at Babson that either I borrowed, stole, or begged from somebody else or developed myself. A lot of times I think this is what's going to be the outcome of this. And then they play it and it's not. It's something completely different. It's something that, is completely 100% different than what I thought the design of the game was. And I'm okay with that. I'm great with that, actually, because it's like they've taken it another level. Coaching's a little like art. You just kind of, I like this, someone else doesn't. That's fine. I mean, you could be a incredibly systems-based, technical, hands-on coach and be really successful. And for me, great for you. You do you. This is how I view the game. This is how we do things here at Babson. I'm not saying it's best. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm happy to talk about what and why and how we do it, but it's what we do.
Are there any particular coaches or books or leadership methodologies or anything that you consider yourself a student of or a disciple of, or is this really just kind of looking inwards? And I'll caveat what I've heard you say before, that one of the key reasons for your success at Babson is the autonomy that you're given to just go to the beat of your own drum and do your own thing. So I'm just curious how much of what you just described is your own thing versus something that influenced that style.
Yeah, I would say I've taken from everybody I've ever been around. Some piece of them is a part of me today, some little particle, good, bad, or indifferent. Every book I've read, I think, has given me something that, I could say, hey, I understand this one, this one sentence is something that fits into, I'll give you an example. Dan Coyle, who wrote The Little Book of Talent, as well as The Talent Code was his first book. I was fortunate to correspond with him a few times, and, just like a fan, I emailed him like, hey, I love your stuff. And he emailed me back. I was like, wow, this is great. We're friends. Not really, but I thought we were. But his Little Book of Talent, he has a section where he talks about improv acting. And with improv acting, the actors have to know when to put themselves into a scene and when not to. And the best at improv can do that. That's hockey. Like, I took that, I highlighted, I think I've given it to the players every year. Like, that's hockey. You've got to know when to put yourself into a scene and when not to. So I have taken something from everybody. Certainly, my 2 high school hockey coaches, Joe Finnegan at Rivers and Jeff Kozak at Hotchkiss, and then my college coach, Steve Sterling, all had kind of on my hockey thoughts, how I develop a hockey program, what I look for in players, who I am as a coach. just strictly from hockey. They have a big imprint. But, I've been really fortunate to be around and coach with, Bob Gaudet, who's my mentor, who, retired from Dartmouth. I spent 7 years with him when I was 23 to 30. I mean, talk about pretty formative years as a coach. He taught me a lot about people and how to do things, and an incredible high coach. But, people I didn't work with, like Bill Beanie, was gracious with his time. Bill Beanie was doing games 40 years ago and people thought, oh yeah, it's just Bill. He was revolutionary. And I'm sure someone before him, he took from somebody. So, but I never worked for Bill Beanie. I competed against him 1 year at Colby in 1990 and probably 10 years here at Babson. But he was gracious with his time when I was an assistant at Dartmouth, spend 2 days with me. And hey, this is what I think and this is what I do. People in the Mass Satellite from 1995 to 2004-ish, I was part of the Mass Satellite program. And I mean, I couldn't start to list all the coaches I worked with who I took something from. Like, there were hundreds of them. So everybody's had a little piece of what I am today. And I hope everybody I continue to be around continues to do that. Our baseball coach, Matt Noon, is a lifelong friend. We played American Legion for Newton Post 440, and we taught coaching. So there's something he's given me. It's just all, it's all combined. If I had one book that I really believe probably shaped a majority of what I believe, would be The New Toughness Training for Sports by James Lair. It was a book in 1992, again, back to, my college coach, Steve Sterling, said to me, hey, you should probably get a master's. I'm like, okay, where do I go? He's like, well, you should do it at BU. Okay, and what? Education. Great, I'm on board. So I had a professor in sports psychology, the first class I took, Len Zykowski, and he gave us this book. And I've read it every year since. And it is more about the individual than the team. It is more about, individuals growing and developing toughness and grit and character and competitiveness. It's both psychological and philosophical. But I would say that book helped me as a coach. It's something I still go back on. And I try to go back on every book I have. Chop Wood, Carry Water, we read as a team 5 years ago, I love. But more than anything, that book spurred me on to want to read more and want to learn more and want to become a better coach and a better teacher and a better, amateur psychologist, and have a better understanding of the why, what, how, where things go. So, if I had to pick just one book, it's probably easier than one person, because that book really spurns so many different things, including my passion to read more about coaching, about leadership. And then, as I said, I got screwed up, so I started reading more fiction. But, I think like most people, I got out of college and I'm done reading for a little bit. And all of a sudden it was like this lightning bolt that came into my life. It's like, hey, there's a lot of information out there. And if you want to be decent at what you do, you better get your hands around as much of it as you can.
I've had some D1 coaches on recently, and I've sensed some frustration that the rules keep changing under their feet, frustration that it's gotten more transactional all around, both sides, right? They have to be more transactional to get the best talent available, and the players are more transactional. They can just take off through the portal at the first sign of adversity, right? And that it's just more about recruiting than development. You strike me as a huge development guy. And so I'm really interested to hear what you're seeing at the Division III level, amongst your colleagues, but also you specifically, because you also strike me as a strong-willed guy who's just going to opt out if you don't, no matter what the Joneses are doing. So what are you seeing and what are you doing?
I think those guys at Division I have an incredibly hard job right now. I was 13 years an assistant in Division I, so I have some knowledge, but it was 22 years ago. And as we've mentioned already, it's like every 2 years is a decade now, and things that change. I think they have an incredibly hard job. And I think, unfortunately, everything tends to be emulated. So what really started with football and basketball in the Division I landscape has now has now, touched every other sport. So what we weren't dealing with by and large, as a sport, much smaller community, 60 whatever Division I, so a smaller community. We weren't dealing with a lot of things. There weren't very many families in Division I hockey who, quote, couldn't afford a cheeseburger on a Friday night. Nature of our sport, nature of our, I'm not saying everyone's wealthy, but certainly the demographics of our sport are much different than Division I college football and Division I college hockey. Completely different. But the rules that went into play for football and basketball then kind of become NCAA wide. So they're kind of a little bit of catching shrapnel from what those decisions were. And I think they have to embrace it, I would imagine. I don't talk to them about it. I see them like, hey, you guys do you. Good luck. I'm happy where I am here in Wellesley. It will come to our level at some point in some variation. I don't think you're going to see massive amounts of NIL money. I don't think you're going to see schools paying kids. But the transfer portal, is probably more transfers now in a given year. The ability to just kind of jump in there and see who, suit you. We do now deal with player advisors a little more at our level than we did 2 years ago, 4 years ago. Certainly 20 years ago, it was non-existent. Yeah, I certainly do try to tilt at the windmills. I have a little too much Don Quixote in me sometimes because I can't fight every windmill. I don't have the answer because everyone's, I think what Ted Donato is faced with at Harvard is much different than Mike Souza at UNH, is different than Greg Brown at BC. All great programs. You've got an Ivy League school, you've got an ACC school, and you've got a smaller state school. They're all coaching Division I hockey. The landscapes are incredibly different in their rules and variations and limitations and constraints. And how do we have a rule that, let's just, again, take the transfer portal. I don't know how many transfers Harvard's had in the last 22 years that Ted Donato's been there. My guess is it's on one hand and maybe one finger would be my guess. I don't know that for a fact. But another school may be able to have 8 transfers a year. But so they're playing by the same rules, the same NCAA hockey rule book, the same NCAA rules for the division, but Ted's playing with a much different constraints and variables than some of his peers are. And even within the haves and the have-nots. So I don't know how you stop any of it. I don't know how you change any of it. Certainly, I think John Calipari, I heard on a podcast, was saying, he thinks it should go back to you can transfer once, and then after that, you have to sit a year. That makes some sense to me. I know someone would cry, well, but a coach could be at 3 schools, and you're dealing with what's crazy is what really. You ever see the movie North Dallas 40?
No.
Great movie. Nick Nolte's
I'll write it down, though.
Yeah, great movie in the 80s. And it's loosely based on the Dallas Cowboys. And Nick Nolte is this receiver who's in the twilight of his career, but been a very good player. And ultimately, the team says they want him to take a shot to get through a game and, in essence, show the other players like, hey, if you shoot up, whatever, take the morals out of it. And he has a line, and he says to the team president, he says, whenever I call this a game, you call it a business. And whenever I call it a business, you call it a game. And I think that's what NCAA Division I is in right now. Right now, the coaches are in it because it's a game. And the outside world is saying you're a business. And then as soon as the coaches say a business, the outside world say, hey, you're just coaching a game here. What are you doing? So I cannot imagine the challenges and difficulties they have. And everybody has something. Our level, Newton North High School has challenges. I mean, you're faced with, you might not have a goalie on your team. If no one in Newton is a goalie, it goes to Newton North. Like, okay, what do you do then? So everyone has challenges. I'm amazed, inspired by, I find it remarkable that they're able to continue to do what they do at such a high level with, as you said, not only the ground shifting beneath their feet, but it's also shifting above their head, from the sides, from the front, from the back. And there's 9,000 different places and people and things that are changing it. Whereas I'm sure they'd love to just come to the rink in the morning, draw practice, put a whistle around their neck, run their practice, go home and not have to worry about that. But I would assume for many of them, if they get a couple hours respite to be with their children or their wives and just put it aside, that's probably a lot.
How much of that is seeping into your world, and directionally, how much do you expect that it will, given your comment before about how, how the seeping is a natural phenomenon?
Yeah, I don't, I mean, certainly one thing that's changed is that, we have more advisors than ever contacting us. Obviously, they have players. So there's more players who have advisors. I'm extrapolating out math-wise now. If more advisors are contacting us, that means they have more players. If there are more players, they have to have more advisors. So, that's one aspect of it. It's really competitive to get a spot anywhere in college hockey or college athletics. So parents are saying, if there's someone who can help me, oh my God, we got to get help, and this person will help me. Again, the financial pieces, I think the bigger financial piece is private school versus public school and financial aid, cost of attendance, opportunity to provide your child an education and not be in debt the rest of your life, and or have them be in debt the rest of their life. So I don't think we'll see players getting paid at our level. I don't think, I don't think the barn wants to call me up and say, hey, we'd love to give you $100,000 to give to your players to do shoe ads for us. Like, that's not going to happen. We're in Boston in a big market. They've got to work through, 158 teams before they get to Babson hockey for any of that. But I think it's inevitable that certainly the first piece that probably has the amount of transfers that are now at Division III schools or looking to move from Division I to Division III, and or are open to that possibility and can put themselves in the portal to have that opportunity.
Do you have a duty to put the best players that you can on the ice, or is your duty to the current players to develop them first and foremost?
Yes, to both. My commitment, our commitment as a program, is to the players and their families that we will help them have a 4-year experience where they will have the opportunity to play. Now, how much success is going to be up to them, and that's sometimes hard for players or families to understand. We are going to play to win on Friday and Saturday, not at all costs, but when we play a game and the officials come and they turn on the scoreboard, it's time to win. Winning's more fun than losing. But we have an obligation to the families that we will help them navigate this incredibly challenging 4-year period of their life and hopefully turn out on the other side with a job, a great experience, some good friends, and a chance to succeed. We have had transfers. We have one now. We have a smaller roster than most of our peers. We have never brought in somebody to replace somebody. We have brought in somebody, whether it be a freshman or a transfer, because we had an opportunity. So last year we had 6 seniors who graduated. We have 4 freshmen and 1 transfer. So we have 1 less person than graduated a year ago. So our transfer who came in, we didn't have 6 freshmen, and then the transfer presented himself and said, oh, now we can have 7. We got to figure out, Machiavellian, who we're going to get rid of. We only had 4. We had an opportunity, a roster spot, a locker. So we're happy to have them. So whenever we've had a transfer, it's been, we have a spot, and our admissions was closed. We weren't getting any more freshmen at that point. So that wasn't an option. They could do that. That's how we choose to do things. I don't know if it's best. It's just what I believe in. When someone drops their child off here, and I understand fully in the course of their child's 4 years, that probably 50% of things that we decide as a hockey program, they're going to say that guy's crazy. I should have played this guy with that, or my kid should be playing more on the power play, or he likes it, whatever it is. But I hope that they can truly, at the end of the 4 years, say, you know what? He helped our son be a part of a good college program, get into a great school, get a great education, and have a good experience. That's our duty. We've had 1 player that I've recruited in 22 years who we have cut. And it had nothing to do with hockey. And I wish it was 0. It's not. We've had 1 player, and it wound up, we recruited him. We got to know him as much as we could. We thought he was going to be a great fit, and it wasn't. But it had nothing to do with ability. There have been kids who graduate from here. We have a captain who graduated in 2010 who didn't have a goal. And he played every game for 4 years and he never scored a goal. So I think we're doing it more than just quote unquote ability when we're trying to make these decisions about how to keep our roster at the right size and who we need to have on it.
I'll be real curious when I make the rounds to other Division III coaches, how many of them have a similar philosophy. I suspect that a lot of them feel pressure to get more transactional and chase talent at all costs. And I admire that you are sticking to your guns, because I think it's very clear that has been one of the recipes for Babson's long-term success as a program versus just, because once you start sacrificing that for the short term, maybe you can win a few extra games, but then it's a leaky boat.
You do you, I do me, and it's not the best, just how we've chosen to do things. And certainly I'm a competitive person. I might come off sounding kind of Pollyanna-ish, oh, he doesn't coach much in practice and the kids just throw the sticks out there and play and he just, whoever comes. Like, no, I'm a competitive person, but I think I've tried to strike a balance between being really competitive, not making it about me, about, having a great experience for everybody, myself included, which winning helps, but I don't reside at other schools. I don't know their parameters. And my boss in Babson College would like us to be very good. Maybe I'm naive to how much pressure there is on us or on me. I mean, I feel more pressure for our program to continue to be successful based on our history than any pressure, our school president could put on me. Like I have a lot of alumni who played a lot of hockey games here on a lot of really good teams who want to see us continue that and don't want us to fall off a cliff. I feel more pressure from that than I could if my boss, the athletic director, or the president said to me, you need to have 20 wins. Like, hey, I'm trying. If you think you can do better, here's the whistle. But trust me, we're going to do everything we can to win. But I think we can do it in a moral and humane and healthy way. But there might be other schools that's like, hey, we got to win because it drives applications, or we're investing XYZ into this program, or we're paying you XYZ, or giving you 1, 2, 3 spots in missions. They have those constraints. I get it. You do you. And maybe it's a place that can't get all the kids they want as freshmen. Maybe it's a place that financial aid wise, can't get enough kids. So they have to do what they have to do. We've just been fortunate to be able to continue to do it the way we have.
So I'm an entrepreneur. I actually went to Babson. So I got my MBA at Babson so I was there 2003 to 2005. So your first year as a coach, I was there as a grad student, funny enough. And I went there because I was in functional roles in startups and was looking to pivot to entrepreneurship and didn't feel ready and needed a little blankie and for someone to kind of pat me on the back and tell me it was okay, I guess. But at any rate, I have been exploring potentially doing something in this space. The problem that I am drawn to is, I guess a couple clarifying questions. So one, it's been said that with the rise of all these individual skills coaches, that the skill of the game is going up, but it's not translating well. And so that might be said as like, it's not translating well. That might be said as IQ is suffering. Like, it's said different ways, but the general theme is that individual skills going up, but the team dynamics are going down, or at least not progressing in the way that the individual skills are. How do you react to that?
I would say I agree, but again, there's so many layers to it. Unstructured free time, if you went to public hockey someplace and it was kids, not adults, at Babson at noon, chances are a father or two would intervene and try to give it some shape. So, when we used to play at the Cove, Billy Cleary, the legendary Harvard coach and Olympian, and he would be playing in these games. And he wasn't like, hey, do it this way. Like, he was just playing. Then you could be playing against 14-year-olds or 8-year-olds or, great players. I don't know, whoever it was, depending on who showed up at the Cove. And I'm certainly romanticizing it a little bit. I think that part of the reason, going back to your question earlier, that we practice the way we do is I probably philosophically believe that hockey sense is lacking a little bit, and that skill is greater than. Now, Tom Sasser, who I played with in 1987 and 88, is the greatest player in the history of our college, or one of three or four. He was incredibly skilled. We had this debate in our locker room last year. One of the players was saying, if we played the 80 Olympic team and they had their equipment and we had our equipment, the game's faster. I said, yeah, agree with all of it. They'd still beat us. Like, they are better players, even with their wooden sticks and their, slower game and whatever. And, how Jim Craig played. Ted Williams hit 521 home runs with a ball that was probably in the game for 5 or 6 innings. Now the average major league ball is in play for like 2.2 pitches or something. So they're hitting a better ball with better technology. So players are able individually skill-wise to do things that we didn't even think of. And maybe because we weren't as inventive, maybe no one, maybe guys did things without it being explained to them when I was growing up. But there's, routinely something every year that somebody does. I'm like, I've never seen that before. 2 years ago, one of our defensemen, the first time I saw it was the thing on a flip puck, tried to catch it with his stick out as opposed to glove it and put it down. I'm like, wait a second, what was that? What just happened? And I've been in hockey for a long time. And then a lot of kids could do that. The backhand toe drag, the Michigan, whatever it is. Like, no one thought to try it. So I think there's some real great things that have come from the individual skill development, but I do think non-competitive, in other words, no one defending you or trying to prevent you from succeeding, isolated, individual skill development does not necessarily help you become a better hockey player on a team. If that's a nice political way to say it, I think it can help you as a player individually skill-wise. I certainly think that there is motor mastery, the 10,000 hour rule. I get that. And I think there is a time and place that those could come into play in a game. I get that. I think it's amazing how far the players have expanded the possibilities. It does not mean you are a better hockey player or you have a better understanding of how that fits into the game. And so I do translate that back to isolated, non-defended, non-competitive individual skills that are born out of repetition. I don't think that makes you a better hockey player. I think it helps you become a better skill player or be able to do more things. But then can you take that and you could give me the manual right now to my Toyota Camry. It's great. I have it. I could read it. 90% of what goes wrong with my car, I can't fix. I have the manual. I could read it. I could study it. I go to O'Reilly Auto Parts. I could get the tools. I could get whatever. I'm still not sure I could do it. I pay a mechanic because he has expertise. And we just had this happen to one of our cars 4 months ago. Took it to one place. Oh my God, it's $2,500. This car will never run again. I hooked it up to the computer. It spit out 11 things. You've got this failure, this failure. This guy listened to it. I think I can fix it. $500. So his ability as a mechanic was born out of individual skill, learning how to do things, how to operate the tools, but also just doing, listening, feeling, touching. And I think that's the part that's probably missing quite a bit in sports right now. And again, it doesn't mean that individual skill development or coaches are not good or valuable. They are. How do you take that and add it to other pieces to help you as a player become a better player? Because ultimately, at least in hockey, you have to play with the other people on the ice. And Tarasov was talking about it 60 years ago. And Herb Brooks was talking about it 40 years ago. And go down the line, everyone's been talking about it. So whatever the skill level is or isn't, it's still a matter of trying to get the orchestra all playing the same notes the right way at the right time.
Okay, so that's validating for the things that I've also observed. Your method of addressing it, whether it's, again, consciously or subconsciously, has been creating environments where they are working on things in a way that is more similar to what they face in game environments, so they can get those 10,000 hours actually doing something in a similar environment versus in a way that's not going to translate when you actually, step on the ice in a game with a referee, with, et cetera. So what I've been thinking about is because the problem is that most people don't have you as a coach, right?
That could be a good thing for some too. I don't want to cut you up, but I've said this often. I think about this. So, and maybe I'm opening the door for an entrepreneur. How does a baby learn to walk? How does it learn to walk better? How does it learn to run? There is no walking baby coach. And again, maybe I've just opened the door and it's going to be $1 billion business. I should have trademarked it. But it's hard in sports for people to understand that some of this you can develop on your own. And you need the right environment. You need the right opportunity. You need the right passion out of the young man or woman, boy or girl. You need the right confluence of events. You need a lot of different things. But the alternative is that those other things do not guarantee it. I guess that's my overarching thing, is that we have been led in almost everything. You're overweight, take that big pharma operates not to keep us from getting sick, not to get political, but to use theirs to, we're not treating the disease, we're treating the symptom. And athletics, academics, there's no difference. Everyone wants the secret path, sauce, pill, answer. And this is one of those ones I say, like, my players sometimes I probably think like the guy is nuts. It's the Wizard of Oz. The lesson of the Wizard of Oz is Dorothy had the power all along. She didn't know it. She had to go through her trials and tribulations to understand that she could get back to Oz on her own by clicking her heels 3 times. It wasn't the wizard alone that did that. And it's more about her discovery, her journey, her development, than it is just getting back to Kansas. And whether we want to say it was a dream or not, that's the message of that story. So when people are seeking others to validate, guarantee, provide the pathway, it has value. But there's no guarantees. And if you go into it, and again, like my child loves hockey. He wants to play more. He wants to succeed. First of all, look at the genetic factor. Like, there is something, if you walked in an NHL locker room or a Division I locker room right now, and you lined all the players up, you'd be like, they all look pretty similar. And even, Brad Marchand, who's shorter, is built genetically different than a player who's here. Then you provide the opportunity for them to have the experiences and get some qualified coaching and learn some things. Then do they take it and apply it on their own? Do they take the skating lesson here, and then do they, try to do some squat jumps for better knee bend? Do they take the stick handling lesson with whoever, and then go in their driveway, basement, garage, and do some of those on their own? Do they take the shooting lesson with whatever ex-shooting coach, and then go in the driveway and shoot some pucks on their own? You need some teaching. None of us are experts. And I know it's really simplistic to say the baby walking running coach, but if you took a sport like running, they're not there at inception when the baby learns to walk, the coaches and the training. And you think of it more at an Olympic level, track and field, college level, certainly high school. But at 8 or 9, are they really training with somebody from Sweden to maximize their VO2 output and start? They're learning to run fast. And maybe they strength train. Maybe they have genetic fast twitch fibers as opposed to somebody else. Maybe they just say, you know what, I'm slower than the person next to me and I'm going to do everything I can to beat them. And they just push themselves to that level. So I don't want to say anybody entrepreneurially can't, get involved. Anybody who's trying, I said at the outset, I don't think anybody is trying to do harm. I think everyone believes what they're doing helps, and I'm sure it does. Just choose wisely. choose wisely. That's another movie reference, the Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. He gets there and they're trying to figure out which one is the cup of salvation. And the knight that's guiding it says to him, choose wisely. And I think that that's what parents have to do.
And that's a reason I haven't anchored on any solution yet. And I'm not going to force it either. I'm not going to anchor unless I truly build conviction, like deep conviction for myself, that it's not just, a pill to mask the symptoms, right? But it actually is fundamentally addressing the problem. But I think the problem, or call it a problem or an opportunity, right, is that some of the stuff that you are going out of your way, you can say it's the kids teaching themselves, but you are being really intentional about the environments that you're creating, right? And I think there's a number of things about the game. This is my thesis, but you can tell me it's a bunch of crap if that's your reaction. But is that there's kind of a long tail of things about the game that the conventional wisdom says are innate. You either have them or you don't, but are actually getting taught. But the way they're getting taught isn't necessarily run to this instructor, run to that instructor, but it's like, having a dad or mom that played the game at a high level, at the breakfast table, who's like, hey, remember that thing in the game? Like that, like your timing should be this, or, come in a little sooner, or try it this way, or do it that way, or use the boards in this way, or you should be scanning, or, like teaching to scan, teaching cognitive, I don't know. Maybe it can't be taught, but it seems like it's not just genetics why there's so many recognizable last names on the back of the jerseys, right? I think some of it is through the osmosis of getting inside the minds of people that really understand the game at that kind of black diamond level. And so how can you package that for everyone that didn't, have a recognizable last name as a mom or a dad?
But I think the flip side of that is, if that was true, only those kids would be succeeding. Austin Matthews' parents were not NHLers. I think it's more noticeable now. Again, I'm not sure I knew anybody from outside of Newton, Mass till I was 12 or 13 years old. I went to Rivers. So if you had told me that, Piccolo Pete, who played for Ludlow Youth Hockey, that his father played in the NHL, I might not have even known that. I've been, who'd he play for? Well, he played for Detroit in the original six in the 60s. I would have been like, yeah, what? Now you can pull up Hockey DB and you can trace the lineage. But the fact is that every professional player who's had a child has not gone on to be a professional player. Some have, with wild success. Take the Kachucks. I don't think Sidney Crosby's father played in the NHL. No, maybe he did. Maybe I'm wrong. I love Sidney Crosby, but, so again, it's, there's people that, Jason, there's people that think I am nutty. Like how he does things, he's full of crap. It's not right. He whatever. And that's fine. You mentioned earlier about, I've said that I'm fortunate. I am not ruled by or fear the judgment of others. But I'm also not going to tell you this is the only way you have to. It's how, when I talk about it, some people are like, I'm just, people ask me, this is how we do it. I'm not telling you should do it this way. I believe in what we do. These are the reasons, as I just mentioned about isolated skill versus team play, but I'm not saying it's the only way. But I do not, I think for any entrepreneur, if you wanted to start something tomorrow, number one thought I would give you or piece of advice, you're going to have 50% of people think you're nuts and 50% of people think you're great. And that's probably a lesson that I as a coach have learned, over the years is like, people don't agree with what I do or what I say or how Babson's been wildly successful, and there's players and families who think it stinks. I love a black and white frap. There's people who think it stink. And that's their own perspective, their own lens, their own right. And I'm fine with that. And I think it's really hard when you're an entrepreneur starting something, because you do need the validation and the quotes and the stream of customers to be successful. So it's like, if you don't start off really successful, or you don't have that Jack Eichel at 8 who enters your program, who Jack Eichel gets 90% of the credit, but you helped him, then it's really, really hard for anybody. Because I don't know what the statistic I should as a Babson alum and employee, but I'm sure there's some statistic on how many entrepreneurs fail, and I'm sure it's much larger. We all sing We all see Shark Tank or the Ring camera, like, oh, I could do that. Why didn't I? There's probably 1,001 for that one that fail.
Ring camera, Babson alum.
Exactly. It's that fear of failure, but more importantly, the fear of judgment from others can be, and I think that translates to what we've kind of been talking about in a roundabout way today for families and their young athletes. Are we being judged for what we have or haven't done? Are we being judged for, how my son or daughter is or isn't as a player? Are we being judged for, what team we've been on, for what neighborhood we live in, for how big our house is, for how big our car is? So we talk a lot as adults and parents now about our kids with FOMO. They have a fear of missing out. The kids, they can't do anything because they have this fear of missing out. Well, don't we as parents, haven't we been providing an environment for them where our fear of judgment maybe creates that fear of missing out? I have had friends who have 1 or 2 children who live in 5 or 6 bedroom houses. I grew up with 7 of us in a 3-bedroom house. So somewhere along the line, what you drove, where you lived, what your neighborhood was, what the cul-de-sac was, what school you went to, had a large bearing on how other people viewed you. Because there really is no reason for somebody with 1 child to have a 5-bedroom house. Now, they can, fine, you do you, I've said that. But practically speaking, they do not need 5 bedrooms. And so while we as parents and adults say, oh, these kids have FOMO, have we created FOMO because we have shown them that we're worried about what other people think about us? We are worried about being judged by other people and how they view our status, how good of a family we have based on, what our zip code is or our address. And someone said this to me a year ago, and I love it, and I use it all the time now. Life is not the Christmas card. What you see when you get the Christmas card is the staged shot with everyone smiling and everything perfect. And the reality is most of us have that 90% under the water like an iceberg. That's really hard. We have illness, we have sickness, we have, deaths, unfortunately, we have births, we have success in our personal lives, we have failures, we have pipes that burst in our front yard, we have washers that don't work, we have kids who don't get into the schools they want to, we have stocks that tank. The Christmas card looks really good. And oh my God, look at them. They're on vacation in wherever, and they're all smiling. 2 minutes before that picture, they could have been at each other's throats. And so when we are thinking about decisions for our kids that we as adults are making, I think we have to think a little bit about decisions we make in our own lives. And are some of those decisions we've made, consciously or subconsciously, affecting our children? And if we're going to bemoan their decisions, can we sit back and say, maybe something I did gave them a little bit of an inkling that, appearance is important, or what we belong to, or what team we're on. Maybe some of that we've created in their lives almost unwittingly and not negatively. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I do think that everything tends to be somewhat interconnected.
Yeah, gosh. Well, the purpose of this show is not to find the answers. I mean, there are no answers.
Not gonna get them from me. I know that much.
Yeah, but it's really just to kind of push on this stuff, like, kind of work, see if, kind of work through some of the knots. It's a great way to learn. I really enjoy it. But, this discussion not excluded. It's been a wonderful discussion. I'm really grateful for you making the time. Is there anything I didn't ask that you wish I did, or any parting words you'd like to leave with listeners?
No, I appreciate you having me on. As I said, I don't have all the answers. This is my thoughts and my beliefs and how we do things here at Babson from a hockey coaching standpoint. But I'm blessed. I had a great family who supported me and gave me opportunities to play sports, to attend Rivers, Hotchkiss, come to Babson, to chase my passion as a coach. It certainly wasn't a traditional path in my family and or at Babson at that time. And I just, I hope people can all find their own way and really trust their own true north. And wherever it takes you, it's all part of your story. And I really don't have the answers. I just have my thoughts on things, and it doesn't mean any of them are right. I guess much like anything else, if someone has stayed on now for the hour and 36 minutes that we've been on and they haven't fallen asleep, I hope you have something you took from this podcast that you'd say, you know what, that's a little piece, and maybe it's a part of one sentence, and maybe it's going to help them in some manner. That I'm thankful. But I appreciate you considering me as someone to have on, and then ultimately having me on today.
Yeah, well, the show is called Puck Academy, and you're a hockey coach, but the discussion was much more holistic. I think about hockey and youth sports, but also about parenting and about life. So yeah, again, I really enjoyed it. Grateful. Thank you, Coach, and best of luck in the rest of the season too.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's listening today.
Thanks for listening to Puck Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone serious about their game. See you next week.